Okay, good morning and welcome to the March 2024 UCLA Anderson Forecast Conference. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. And we have a great program today. Let me first do introductions. I'm Jerry Nicholsberg. I'm the faculty director of the Anderson Forecast. And we have with us our forecast team, William Yu, who will be speaking a little later in the morning. William is our expert on Los Angeles and on China, and he's going to talk about China today. And then Thomas Ash, and Thomas is a finance, environmental, and regional economist, and joined us this year. Sayantani, who is a real estate economist, also joined us this year, and Ji-Yoon Lee, who is our climate change economist. She's going to be speaking in September, Sayantani in June, but we're real excited about the new economists who have joined the forecast and the research they're producing. First to start off, this is a joint conference with the Center for Media, Entertainment, and Sports. And the second half of the program, they have put together a really interesting program on what's happening in sort of the, maybe you would call it turmoil, at least the change in the entertainment industry, and the School of Theater, Film, and Television here at UCLA. And we're going to talk a little bit when we get to the California outlook about budgets and the state budget, and you've heard about these big deficits. We're a public institution, and we could not put on programs like this without the help of our sponsors. So we are immensely grateful to them, and I'd like to acknowledge them. Our principal sponsors today are RSM and Yamava Resort and Casino at San Manuel. Our platinum sponsors, the law firm of Allen Matkins, California Bank and Trust, Cathay Bank, Clark Construction, Leap Development, and University Credit Union. Our gold level sponsors, Avenue Analytics and Insights. I flipped that, Insights and Analytics. California Steel Industries, Hub International, PNC Bank, Robert Half, and United Airlines. And at the silver level, Bank of California, Chevron, Comerica Wealth Management, Marsh McClellan Agency, Scott Work North America, and U.S. Bank Private Wealth Management. At the bronze level, HDR, and Shawmut Design and Construction, and the Bruin level, Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management, and as always, our academic sponsor, UCLA Extension. So many thanks to them. If you didn't hear your company's name, see us afterwards. We can fix that for next time. I'd also like to acknowledge our staff, Seth Katz, George Lee, and Virginia Dela Cruz Gatau. They're the ones behind the scene that actually make all of this possible. And so many thanks to all of the hours and expert effort that they put in to make this happen. Okay, so that takes care of the introductions and the program. I'm going to begin by talking about the US outlook and the California outlook. Then we're going to turn to William, who's going to talk about what's going on in China and how that affects us here in California and the US. We'll finish this first segment before the break with a short presentation of some work that I've started on the economic impact of the writers and actors strike on Los Angeles. So this is a topic that's been much in the news, and we've been very silent on it, and I want to tell you why we've been silent and what the issues are in trying to, kind of assess the impact of a labor action, and this one in particular is so important for Los Angeles. Then we'll have our break, and then after that we have a keynote conversation and a panel, and they're going to talk about the changing business of entertainment and how AI is affecting business. So an interesting program today, but let's begin with the US forecast and the California forecast. And George, can you bring my slides up? There. Okay, so I've entitled this 2024, is the mic on? Yeah. 2024, a return to normalcy. And you see the picture over here of Warren G. Harding. So that was his slogan at the beginning of the last Roaring Twenties. And so I thought that was appropriate because we may be at the beginning of the current Roaring Twenties. And on the right-hand side, you see gridlock. Anyone who does a forecast today has to make an assumption about what's going to happen with the federal government going forward through the forecast horizon. And it really is anybody's guess. There isn't data that we have that can tell us. So the assumption that we make, and we want to be explicit about it, is that regardless of what happens in this election year, we have gridlock in Washington. Maybe a fair assumption, may not be something to keep an eye on, because if we don't have gridlock, some of the things that we're going to talk about today are not going to happen, or some of the things that are being proposed by the political candidates might happen. Okay, so let's, our roadmap for today, we're going to look at the macro outlook, and then interest sensitive and other national sectors, and then turn to California and the California outlook. And so let's jump right in with the macro outlook. This is GDP growth rates, and the vertical line there is a separation between actuals and the forecast. And so let's look first to the kind of the left of the forecast. Of course, you remember when so many, in fact, if you read the East Coast press, every economist, but that wasn't true because we didn't, but every economist was predicting the third quarter of 2023 was going to be a recession. Comes in at 4.9% growth rate, some recession. We were at the high end of the consensus, always at the high end. The others started coming up towards us, but we were still low. That was an outstanding growth, and the same was true with the it says 3.3%. They revised to 3.2% growth in the last quarter. For the coming quarter, we have 2.2%, and we're sort of in the high end of consensus as well. We've got not much change in inventories, which is not the case in the last 2 quarters. And we have some slowing growth, not the kind of growth that gives you recession, but slowing growth. And I want to show you why. Most of that is just because of capacity. We have an unemployment rate of 3.9%. When you run out of people, you can't grow very fast. And that gives us a dip to 1.5% in the middle of the year, and then it drops even to 1%. That's slowing, and then we pick back up and go back to trend of 2.5% through the forecast horizon. So that's our macro forecast for the US. No recession, no recessions in the data, but a slowing growth in 2024. And so what's happening with inflation? The Federal Reserve for several years said we are raising interest rates until the inflation rate is 2%. So where are we today? This is the February numbers that just came out this week, came out yesterday morning, 3.8% for core inflation. So that is the inflation rate excluding energy and food. So those are the more volatile components. The headline, which includes those, is at 3.2%. And the February numbers, headline is up by 0.1%. The core is down by 0.1%. I mean, that's statistically the same. And that was not a surprise, at least to us. That's about where we had it in our forecast last time, 3 months ago. But our forecast going out, we've got 2.7 and 2.5% inflation. So that's still above where the Fed says it wants to go. And we don't think the Fed is going to follow what they've been saying, which is higher interest rates. And the reason we don't think that is we think there's an issue in the metrics that the Fed is aware of, but it keeps them from raising rates. They're not going to say, never mind, we're not going to 2%. But they're going to say, well, conditions and data, we're going to maybe lower rates. And that's exactly what Chairman Powell is saying. So I want to show you the why of this. Why do we have it up at around in the upper 2s? And still the Fed is not moving to bring it down lower. And to do that, I want to decompose the consumer price index. The way the consumer price index is calculated is a survey is done in various cities across the US, and an average household budget is constructed. And then each month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics goes out and prices that household budget. And the difference between the cost for that budget today and last month is the inflation for that month. And so let's look and see what's driving the increase that we just saw. So here you've got the orange and the blue blocks. The orange is the contribution of each of the items in that budget to inflation. And you have to weight them, right? So maybe the price of toothpaste went up a lot, but it's a small part of the household budget. So you don't want to give it a lot of weight. You give it the weight as the percentage of the budget. And so as we move from left to right, the orange is the contribution of each item, and the blue is the sum of all of those to the left, right? So we're adding up to get to what was last month's 3.9% core inflation rate. And what you notice here is not much is happening till you get to the last two, right? That's where the action is. In fact, in goods, we have deflation. We have prices going down. The last two are something called other transportation and shelter. Other transportation, you might think that's those airplane tickets that went, where the prices went up. Is not. The airplane ticket prices are going down. It is automobile repair and the insurance to cover it. And it's not automobile parts, it's the labor. And what's happening there is the cars that we're driving today increasingly are sophisticated. They're electric cars or they have driver assist. And what you need to repair them is a highly specialized technician, right? You're not going to go into your garage with a set of ratchet wrenches and fix anything in a car today. You need someone who's been trained, who has the equipment. That is what's driving this. And as older cars wear out, the US fleet becomes increasingly more sophisticated, which means this average price keeps going up. Raising interest rates isn't going to change that, right? So the Fed knows that's not something they can affect. The second is rents. And so if you have a mortgage, you're not in this. This is just rents. And rental rates are not going up anymore. So you would think that this would be small, but this is the average rent that renters pay. And when folks rent an apartment or a house, they do so typically on a long-term lease. When that lease expires, it gets rebased to current rates, current market rates. That's an increase, even though current rents are not going up. That's going to be an increase in the average. Also, rent-stabilized units, and there are increasing numbers of those across the US. When someone leaves a rent-stabilized unit, it gets rebased to market. Those two raise the average rates. Higher interest rates is not going to change that. The Fed knows that, so they're going to be satisfied with the kinds of inflation rates that we have. And that leads us to our, might lead us there. George, we're not advancing. There. Too much. It leads us to our interest rate forecast. So the blue is the federal funds rate, and we have the Fed just standing pat till later in the year. They might move earlier in the year, but the weaker economy in the third quarter is what at least the economics says should trigger a Fed decrease in the federal funds rate. And part of the reason for that is not to counteract necessarily the weakness, but because the inflation rate is coming down, the real rate, the inflation adjusted rate, is going up, and the Fed doesn't want to be tightening credit conditions. So we have it coming down 75 basis points into 2025, and then holding constant in the mid fours. In the last time we were together, we had the 10-year going up to 5% and the yield curve flipping to right side up. The 10-year doesn't seem to want to go to 5%. is kind of stuck there at around 4%. And so now we have just kind of a very gradual rise. And part of this is foreign money coming in, but the 10-year seems to be, we're kind of right in the low fours, and the yield curve is flattening, but it doesn't really go right side up in our forecast. Okay, so that brings us to interest-sensitive sectors. Why do we have slowing growth but no recession? And the first one I want to show you is new building permits. And this is for the US. And so it's going 2018 to 2024. And you see a big jump there in the middle that I call the pandemic surge. We had a lot of migration that was happening during the pandemic. We also had a lot of folks who said their places were too small to be working from home. Sitting, if you have a home office, okay, you're golden. But if you're sitting on your bed 8 hours a day with a laptop open, you probably are going to be demanding a larger place to live. And so we had a lot of building that was in response to that. That's over with now, and we're kind of in more normal times. So if we look at, remember, this is a return to normalcy. If we look at pre-pandemic and today in housing markets, pre-pandemic, 4% 30-year conforming, 30-year fixed conforming mortgage rates, and building in the US was at about 1.3 million per year, which is below our historical average. And we've been below our historical average for a long time. So we've been underbuilding, not just here in California that we hear about, but across the country, underbuilding. And if we look at today, with mortgage rates in the 6.5% to 7% rate, we're back up at 1.5 million, which is slightly above our historical average. The latest numbers that came in for starts had it down in below 1.4 million. But if you kind of unpack that, that's related to snowstorms back east, right? And the permits were actually much higher. And so this is permits. So we're building at about average levels now. And that's for at least two reasons. But there are two really important reasons. One is people have jobs, they have money, and they can buy homes, even at 6.5% to 7% mortgage rates. People who have mortgages in the 2.5% to 3% are not selling their homes. They don't want to upsize or downsize and get into a 7% mortgage. So where are the folks who want to buy homes going to buy homes? The new builders. And they're buying out the inventory of builders. Builders can sell their houses at good prices. Since they can sell their houses at good prices and their inventory is shrinking, they're building more. The second reason, which is equally as important, is that the largest 3-year cohort in the demographics is 31 to 33-year-olds. And that's prime home buying age. So you have all of that additional demand that's coming in. And again, where are they going to buy homes? New homes. Right? So you've got these two forces that are holding up housing markets. And my colleague Ed Leamer wrote a paper, Housing is the Business Cycle, because 7 of the last 10 recessions were induced by a big turndown in housing as a consequence of higher interest rates and overbuilding of housing. We don't have overbuilding, and we don't have a downturn. Okay? But will we be able to go from where we are today to a much higher level? We don't have that in the forecast. We're kind of staying at around 1.5 million. So that's one of the reasons for the slowdown in growth this year. Turning now to autos. Autos, we also haven't overbuilt. The age of the US fleet is actually getting a bit older, and those are going to wear out. People are going to be buying new cars. And what you see here is there's a lot of fluctuation. During the lockdown, no one could go to showrooms. Then it comes back. Then we have the chip shortage. And now what we have is just back to average. And we may be too low on this. But we certainly don't have autos responding to higher interest rates with dramatically lower production. Another place where interest rates can impact the economy, and an important place, is in business investment. So what you see in this graph is durable goods. It excludes aircraft because aircraft orders are very volatile. Boeing, for a couple of months, particularly with the 737 MAX issues, had no orders. And then in the last 10 days, they've had a couple of really big orders. So that will kind of make the data look a little funny, but you could average that out. It's going to look the same as this. And this excludes defense. And I'm going to say a few things about defense later. And look at what's happening. We're record orders. The last 4 months, we've seen a very slight decline in orders, but not much, as you see in this chart. But backlogs are up. This is a capacity constraint. So manufacturing is going to remain strong through our forecast horizon because you have these backlogs. And part of what's going on, because we have new industrial policy with the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act, we have new factory construction all over the US. And so you see it just kind of moves along and then it shoots up almost vertically. So we'll have new factories coming online in the next couple of years. They'll be hiring people, they'll be producing durable goods. So all of these interest-sensitive sectors are telling us no recession, and usually the interest-sensitive sectors are the ones that signal the alarm that the economy is getting weak. Instead, we've got the opposite. But each one of them is, kind of the growth rate is flattening out a bit as they run into capacity constraints, and that gives us that weaker 2024. So let's turn to some other sectors. We have consumption, defense, and of course, we've heard about all of the layoffs in tech. So we want to look at that nationally. And the first is consumption. So this is real consumption. It's adjusted for inflation. And if we just put in a trend line, a pre-pandemic trend line, we're not only above it, we're not coming back to it. Okay. And there was a lot of talk about, student debt, right? Student debt is going to keep people from consuming. A lot of talk about the transfer payments during the lockdown. That's what's being spent. That's what's keeping consumption up. That's pretty much spent by those who have a high propensity to consume. And if you look at this chart, it's not making any difference. Savings rates are going down. We're consuming more. And the reason for that is the pandemic was a big event and it changed us. And if you look back at other big events, the Great Depression, the influenza pandemic, the First and Second World Wars, any big event, that changes people. And what's changed here is we're much less willing to wait to consume than we were before. We want to go out, we want to be with people, we want to enjoy ourselves. We're not postponing that consumption. Here at UCLA, I did a talk in the Emeritus program. So these were a number of seniors who've come back as part of UCLA's extensions programs. And this was in around the 1st of November. And again, so the narrative was it's going to be a bad holiday season because all of that stimulus money is spent. And I asked them, how many of you are going to spend less on your grandchildren over the holidays because your stimulus payment has now been spent? How many hands do you think went up? Right, 0. I said, how many are going to spend more on your grandchildren this year? Every hand went up, right? We've changed, and this is reflected in the data. And consumption is 2/3 of GDP demand. So we see no weakness there. And remember that the durable goods demand excluded defense. It's a more dangerous world. Defense budgets are going up. And that disproportionately affects California because these defense budgets for defense durable goods, they go to California, Texas, a little bit to Arizona, Georgia, and Connecticut. So only a few places actually get this money. So that's demand that's going to come into California. And the last time we had a buildup, was in the 80s with the Reagan buildup in the Cold War, and that really affected California and caused a lot of growth in California. But defense budgets are going up. Also, our international allies are buying more defense durable goods. Not all of that comes here, but 40% of it does. So this is additional demand on the economy. So that brings us to tech, and you've heard about the tech layoffs. Squint as you might, You can't find employment in tech declining here. So what is happening? What's happening is tech is growing, but the larger tech firms have now become mature. They grew fast, they had a lot of money, and they spent it on new lines of business and buying other companies, and some of that worked and some didn't. And as a company matures, it then looks at this and sheds those things that aren't working, and they reorganize. Those tech workers who were laid off are being employed by growing tech firms. There was an NPR article in Seattle about the layoffs from Amazon. And the article, basically was a series of interviews with tech firms, all of whom said, we're glad that Amazon is laying off because we don't have to compete with them for talent. And so they're soaking that talent up. So we don't see that in tech either. In fact, 2.9% growth in tech employment in the US in the last 12 months. So, kind of go through these, and we don't get anything that tells us there's going to be a recession, just a little bit of weakness. And then finally, oil prices are important. Oil production is important for fueling the economy. And so what you see here is oil production. This is extraction in the US in the blue line, and prices are the orange line, and they're on different scales. We're at record levels of production today. And oil prices went up, they spiked, they've come back down. They're sitting right around 80, depending on what measure you look at. West Texas Intermediate is just below, Brent is just above. It depends on kind of the quality of the petroleum. But oil prices have been fairly stable, as you see here, for some time. What's happened in oil markets, and where you see this spike, is after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions that were put on, there was a withdrawal of petroleum from world markets. That's the spike. Now that's all been reorganized. So Russia sells to China. China doesn't buy from others, leaving that petroleum on the market for others. Saudi Arabia cuts back on production. Texas increases production. And we've just kind of, moved the deck chairs around here, but nothing really has changed. And so petroleum is not an issue in terms of a growing economy. And the petroleum prices here are not adjusted for inflation. When you do that, you see there's even less increase in petroleum prices. So for the US, we have employment and income remain strong. Investment and consumption continues to drive economic growth. Interest rate increases have had an impact on the economy. There's a small impact, and we've got small decreases in our forecast. And infrastructure, industrial policy, and defense are just going to add demand to an economy that's already at full employment. So one of the issues is, how do you get more people into the workforce? How much immigration do we have? All of this is going to affect the rate of growth that the US economy can obtain. And really do have to come back and mention recession. A recession is coming eventually, but it's not in the forecast. There's nothing in the data that tells us it's going to be in the next couple of years. Okay, but there's a lot of risk. And so we really do need to recognize that, because that will cause what happens in the economy to deviate from what we're saying will happen. And part of that, a large part of that, is conflict in the Middle East, in Russia, Ukraine, potential conflict, China, Taiwan, India, and Pakistan. We have election worries about what economic policy is going to be in place in 2026. 2025, really not much can change right away. Although, as William's going to talk about, it could change vis-a-vis our imports from China. And supply chain interruption. So big climate events in the manufacturing centers in Asia could cause supply chain interruptions. We're not forecasting big climatological events, but they could happen today. As we see, we get an increasing number of them. So also something to watch. Okay, so let's turn to California. And what you've been hearing for California is all kinds of numbers all over the map about the budget deficit. So the first thing to realize when we're talking about a budget deficit is it's not the same kind of deficit that you or I have, which is we didn't get enough income and we spent too much on our credit card and now we've got to borrow, right? The kind of deficits that's being talked about is the difference between forecast revenues and desired expenditures, ex ante, before that even happens. And so then you're trying to reconcile that. And that's where you get, these wide swings in numbers between the legislative analyst's office and the governor. And then that's all part of a negotiation. But let's take a look at what the issues are here. And what I want to show you is the cumulative contributions to the general fund. And we're going to start with 2018, 2019 is cumulative. So this is by fiscal year, so July to June. And it's increasing as you go from left to right. And so this is 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020. And then 2020, 2021, this is when tech really takes off. And we get a big jump in revenues. And the same is true in the next year. And then we get the last budget year. And it's kind of back to normal. It's a little bit above, but it's kind of back to normal. This is adjusted for inflation. But one thing that happened last year was that we had a postponement of tax payments. And so how much revenue was going to be received was forecast, but there was a lot of, wide band of forecast error because of this postponement of tax receipts. What happened, in fact, was last year we ended up with a real deficit, and that deficit has to be paid for this year. So that impinges on this year's budget. Here's where we are today. And that's, above last year. And then you have to make a forecast. Where is that going to go? And that's what all the negotiations are about. And so the issues are how much revenue? There's not a lot in capital gains that are in these forecasts that you're seeing. But IPOs are starting to happen in California. We've had 2 med tech IPOs, and Reddit is getting ready to go into the market. And so we may have a lot of IPOs before the fiscal year is out. Housing market is also a source of capital gains here, and that's dead in the water. So that's not going to happen. And so there are one-time expenditures that can be postponed. That's being discussed. There's planned future expenditures that are being pushed a little further in the future. And what, if anything, to cut? Well, we've had some expansion of programs, including an expansion of Medicaid. And so this is where the cuts have to be made, although they're not going to be huge. Where the cuts have to be made is a difficult conversation. But nevertheless, in spite of these big numbers that are being thrown around, the impact on the California economy is going to be very small. Okay, so this is not a real worry for growth in California. It's consistent with a weak 2024, but not a big worry. Okay, so let's turn to employment. You see the 16% drop that occurred with the lockdown. And right now we're 1.9% above the previous peak. So we have record employment in California. And you remember 500,000 people left California. But as you were driving here this morning on the 405, you might have wondered who left. It hasn't changed, right? What has happened is that large families for folks who have limited incomes decided that this is a really difficult place to live, and they're right, and they've moved to other locations. We also had people with remote work who have moved out who are now moving back in. But productivity is increasing in California, per capita income is increasing in California, and the California economy is growing, and all these people are on the 405 instead of in Texas, messing up my commute. So we have record growth, and and so let's break that down by sector. Here we have logistics. So logistics is a sector where we've lost, over the last 3 months, we've lost employees. But then the others, we've got tech. We want to talk about tech in California, and then manufacturing, and then construction. So let's go through these sectors. But first, where is there growth in employment in the state. That the light blue block is the US. And to the left, we have North Bay, San Joaquin Valley, Central Coast, Sacramento, and the Delta. Part of this is the fact that people can live further away from work with hybrid work. But then if they're living further away from work, they're demanding retail and entertainment and other things, and that creates growth in those areas. And then most of California, it's been growing in the last 3 months a little slower than the US, but fairly close to. And then you get on the right-hand side, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, and San Francisco. I'm sorry, I've been saying this the last 3 months, last 12 months. The last 3 months, these last three, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, and San Francisco, they've flipped, and now they're growing faster than the US in terms of employment growth. Okay, so this doesn't look too bad, but is really consistent with very weak growth this year. So let's turn to manufacturing. This is manufacturing output in California. It grew by 26% from 2018 to today. So manufacturing is growing, and we have factories going up in mostly in inland parts of the state. So in the northern part, in the high desert here in Los Angeles, in the Central Valley, in Temecula and southern Riverside County, we have new factories that are going up. And so manufacturing is going to be expanding in California. The difference between this and the manufacturing we used to do here is this is advanced manufacturing. It takes many fewer people because it takes robotics technicians, not riveters. And I like to say, Rosie the riveter is gone in California. It's Rosie the robotics technician. That's the change that's happened here. And that has real implications for workforce development in the state. Okay, so let's turn to the ports and logistics. So what you see here is a growth in port traffic. This is the San Pedro Bay ports. So this is the largest ports in this hemisphere. And you get the growth, and then you get a big spurt here during the pandemic. This was when, at least when I was in a meeting that was boring, I was really on Amazon saying, I'll buy that, I'll buy that. And a lot of people joined me. And so we get a big peak. And we had ships trying to get into the California ports that were lined up. You could practically walk to Catalina across the tops of the ships, right? And that's that drop there where the ports were just clogged, and then it went back up, and then the end of the pandemic, but then it drops back to way below where we were at pre-pandemic. And that's a decrease in logistics employment that you saw. Now it's coming back up. So what was happening here was this drop was because we had a threatened railroad strike, and we had a threatened longshoreman strike. And so shippers correctly diverted some of their traffic to East Coast ports. Now it's coming back, and we think it's going to come back to even higher levels than before. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is this looks like the San Pedro ports during the time when they were clogged. This is the Panama Canal. Climate change has made the Panama Canal, made traffic through the Panama Canal slow down because there's a big freshwater lake in the center, and the ships have to pass through that. And drought has dropped the level of that lake, so fewer ships can go through, and they have to go slower. And these ships are out here, and for the larger ships, it's $1 million a day to be on the ocean, right? So if you have to sit there and wait, that's very costly. The second reason is it's not just California that has labor actions. The East Coast ports are now facing that, and traffic is being diverted back to the West Coast ports. And then the third reason is that what's going on in the Horn of Africa and the Suez Canal makes it really dangerous to go that way with your ships. Why not bring them to Los Angeles, Long Beach, Oakland, Puget Sound, and ship it by rail to other parts of the US? So all of that says that our logistics forecast, which was really very muted, should be higher. And so we raised that. Tech job growth, and you see a little bump here, unlike the US, and then it flattens out. And it flattens out now. It's just starting to absorb these tech workers. More so than the US, we see some impact here. And that's part of the reason why California's unemployment rate has been going up. That's what you saw in the San Francisco numbers. But we're not worried about that in the forecast either because of AI. Everyone wants to be at kind of the leading edge of AI. And if you want to do that, you have to be in San Francisco. There's no other place in the world to be. And you can see that here. This is from KPMG's Venture Pulse for the fourth quarter of 2023. Venture capital was down in 2023, and in particular in the fourth quarter. But these are the top 10 things that we're invested in. And we'll just quickly go through them. San Francisco AI, Los Angeles AI, San Francisco Health Tech, one for DC. San Francisco FinTech, Long Beach gets aerospace, San Francisco Software, San Diego AI, San Francisco Health Tech, and then New York gets one. The money is coming here and into our tech industry. So that's just a little bump in that road, that bump up and then down. And then we're expecting growth in tech as we move forward through the forecast horizon. And then moving to housing markets, we already talked about housing sales, new existing single family homes. It's at depression levels, so that's the upper left-hand one. You go to the lower right-hand, that's prices. Prices are up. And permits are kind of at the high level of recent years, but they're sort of poised to take off. But there's one issue that we have, and it's a capacity issue. So this is employment in construction, and that was one of the growing areas. And let's start in the upper right-hand side. That's non-residential construction at peak levels. Heavy and civil at peak levels, and the Infrastructure Act is going to increase that. Moving around, we're going clockwise. Specialty trade construction, and that's at peak levels, and specialty trade supports all of these others. And residential is not at the peak that we had during the speculative building in 2004, 2005, and into 2006, but it's been growing steadily. So we're going to run out of construction workers. Again, this is workforce development. It means slower growth in housing. And so that brings us to the summary for California. Hollywood, which we're going to talk about a little later, is coming back, but slowly. But we get a faster growth in logistics. Defense, aerospace are going to ramp up this year. Tech, AI is the new darling of the VCs. Construction, we've got labor force constraints on that. So lots of things are kind of constraining more rapid growth. And our risks are the familiar ones: housing and homelessness, public safety, drought and deluge from rain, and what William is going to talk about next, the potential for shutdown in China trade and what is happening in China. So just a few numbers to finish up. We've got week 24 growing again 25, and we're going to be back to 29, a return to normalcy here in California. We have a fairly aggressive forecast for building permits. That really depends on getting that construction labor force. And that brings me to the end of this. So thank you. And now let me turn it over to William Yu, who's going to talk about events in China.
Thank you, Jerry. Oh. Right. Good morning, everyone. So today I would like to share with you our China economic outlook. So let's begin with China's GDP. So over the past year, we have heard a lot of negative news on the Chinese economy. However, the Chinese government report their 2023 GDP growth was 5.2%. So is that accurate? Some people say the number is too high. Some say it should be 4.5%, should be 4%, should be 3.8%. So it's good we have our own model to estimate China's GDP growth. So our simple, straightforward alternative model use 4 easily available inputs: energy consumption, CO2 emission, total trade, home price. So based on our model, you can see in the chart, the blue line represents the government official number, and the red line represents our model estimation. So you can see, as we mentioned before, our estimation for Chinese economy is lower and more volatile. So in 2023, our model estimate China's GDP growth was 0.8%, much lower than government official number. All right. So I argue that Chinese economy is facing three major structural challenge problems, and this will lead to tough times ahead, and probably will take a long time to fix. So number one, real estate bubble bust. I will talk about more later. Number two, great power competition. So because of US-China strategic competition, we are seeing more and more de-risking policy implemented by both China and United States. And we're going to talk about how does that impact the supply chain and international trade. And number three, states advance and private sector retreats. And we know this will have negative impacts on rule of law, property rights, and business and investor confidence in China. So right now, let's talk about real estate. So in this chart, I show you the real estate, residential real estate investment as a percentage of the GDP. So the blue line is the United States, the red line is China. So you can see, let's focus on the United States first. So basically, over the past century, our residential investment share fluctuate around 3% to 6%, averaging at 4.5%. So just like Jerry talked about, when this investment share is above this average for too high for too long, we got overinvestment. And usually it will lead to housing market slump and possibly a recession. Right? For example, let's see, in 2005, we had this housing bubble peak at 6.6%, right? And then it plummeted to 2.4% in several years later. So this triggered a painful housing slump and also painful Great Recession. Right now, let's look at China. So China's real estate bubble, as you can see, probably is much bigger than the United States. So since 2006, China's residential investment has surpassed 6.6%, the peaking of the United States, and then reached 9 to 10% over the past decade. Right. So right now, in the past 3 years, we have seen this kind of high investment decline from 10.3% to 6.7%. So this is 3 or 4% decline, similar to our Great Recession. And so that is the indication of Chinese real estate trouble. But the problem is this 6.7% is still very high. Yeah. So we predict there will be a continuation of contraction in this housing sector in the future. And finally, history like Great Depression, you can see on the left, Great Recession, I just talked about, and Japan's lost decades. In the aftermath of this housing bubble, real estate bubble bust, we will usually see a long-term stagnation when the household, company, and banks are afraid to consume, to invest, to borrow money, to lend money, because they need to repair their balance sheet. All right, so right now, let me give you another evidence. So this chart shows you housing unit starts in China and United States. Because China's population is 4 times that of United States. So here I show you 2 different scales on both axes. So the blue line is United States on the right axis. So you can see from 0 to 6 million units per year. On the left is China, is from 0 to 24 million units a year. So let's look at the United States first. So over the past several years, just Jerry has talked about our housing start building permit fluctuate around 1.5%, which is, I think, is average, very good, healthy. And then going back to 2005, as you can see, at the peak, we are building 2 million units, and there was a housing bubble, and then it crashed. So right now, let's look at China on the left scale. So since 2006, China has been building more than 8 million units, which is equivalent of United States 2 million units, right? And then it keep going up and reach 20 million units in 2019 and 2020. So China's housing bubble is way bigger than the United States. And it's even worse, as you might not know, as of December 2023, China still had 74 million units under construction. And I believe a lot of them will not be complete. All right. So we focus on residential real estate. So right now, let's talk about the overall investment, which include residential, commercial real estate, public infrastructure, like high-speed rail, highway, airport, those kind of things, and the manufacturing investment. So here, this is the investment share of GDP for the major economy. So at the bottom is the blue line is the United States. The black line is the world average, fluctuate around 25%. And the green line is Japan. And the red line is China. So again, as we can see, since about 2008, China investment share of its GDP has consistently surpassed 40%. So that is another evidence of overinvestment. So this is unprecedented, even higher than the Japan's bubble economy in 70s and 80s. So usually this overinvestment means there's a lot of allocation of resources, negative return, and eventually a lot of defaults. All right. So the other thing is this usually overinvestment will come with over leverage and debt. And this is exactly what happened. So in this chart, I show you the total debt, total private sector debt to GDP ratio. The blue line is the United States, the green line is Japan, and the red line is China. So we have seen that China's debt increased rapidly over the past decade, reach 230% of its GDP. So let's go back to look at Japan, what happened. So when the Japan's bubble burst in the 90s, you can see this investment share and GDP go down, and then they were started to kind of this deleveraging process. So we expect China has to go through this again, and it will take a long time to go through this painful deleveraging process. And if we include the government debt, China's government total debt to their GDP ratio is 307%. That's also very high, much higher than US 253%, or G20's average 248%. Yeah. All right. So right now, let's talk about how the supply chain kind of change in this US-China strategic competition when both sides are using this so-called de-risking policy to pursue supply chain resilience. So here in this chart, I show you the US top 10 goods import source regions and its import share. So the biggest things you can see, the blue bar represent what happened, the share in 2016 before the US-China trade war occurred in 2018. And the red bar is 2023, the latest data. So the biggest change is China. So China used to be our biggest import source, accounts for 21% of all our imports in 2016, and right now accounts for only 14%. So over the past several years, we have seen this 7.3 percentage points decline, and Mexico increased by 2 percentage points. Right now, Mexico become our largest import source, which is benefit from USMCA. And this is what we call nearshoring, including Canada. On the right part of the chart, you can see we also increase our import from South Korea, Vietnam, Taiwan, India, Ireland. So this is what we call friendshoring. So these things are going on, including what Jerry talking about is industrial policy, manufacturing resurging in the United States, reshoring. Okay, so right now I'm going to show you actually there are 3 kinds of US-China trade based upon different kind of product One, I call it a gradual decoupling. The representative product is cell phone, iPhone. So we import most of our iPhone made in China. So you can see a majority of it from China. In 2016, it accounts for 63% of our all cell phone imports. And in 2023, it still is very high, 56%. All right, so I think it's because it takes time and it is very costly to kind of move this kind of very extensive supply chain out of China. And number two is this rapid decoupling due to, for example, national security concern. On the left is our our computer accessory imports. China used to be number one, accounts for 53% of our computer accessory import. Right now, only accounts for 23%. On the right, telecommunication equipment. So it used to be number one, 40%. Probably a lot of them are from Huawei. And right now it's only 16%. Yeah. And number three, we still had a continued reliance on some kind of Chinese product. For example, battery for our EV production. So in the chart, you can see on the left, China, we import from China 27%, right now 25%. Doesn't change a lot. Because why? Because Chinese battery or other solar panel things are still very competitive advantage. All right. So finally, my conclusion is China's economic outlook is bleak for a prolonged period. And U.S. de-risking policy for Chinese import will continue with minimal impact on the U.S. economy. I forgot to mention one thing. So we are importing 14% of our product from China. They account about 1.6% of our GDP. So I believe our supply chain, global supply chain, is very resilient. So in the future, if we have some kind of trade friction with China, I think our supplier will figure out. All right, thank you.
Thank you, William. And we're going to have a few minutes for questions, but I want to go through one more thing, and this is kind of the transition to the second part of our program, which is going to look at the changing business of the changing landscape for the entertainment business. What I want to talk about in the next couple of minutes is the economic impact of the dual strikes, the writers and the actors strikes. And you might remember that all through this time period of the strikes, and even in anticipation, there were big numbers thrown around in the press. It's $3 billion impact, it's $6 billion impact. We received lots of inquiries and we said we have no data, and so the answer is we're not going to answer the question. Now we have some data, but what I want to do is really illustrate something that's kind of important when you're looking at the economic impact of strikes or sporting events or any kind of sort of one-off events. The most important thing to realize is that strikes are not surprises. Everyone knew these strikes were going to happen. And if you know something like that is going to happen, you take defensive measures to minimize the impact on yourself. So members of the labor union, even those who are going to be impacted but are not members of the labor union, they start saving more. Producers start producing more, so they start stockpiling. And you really have to account for that. In the previous writers' strike, what we saw in the data was there was a huge amount of stockpiling. And so if you had a film that was going to be done in December, you knew the strike was going to start in November, and you produced the film in September, you really haven't done anything but change the temporal pattern of production, right? That film is still produced, just at a different time. It wouldn't have been produced in September. So we have to really look and ask the question, what is the base from which we compare? When we want to do an economic impact, we have a base, and then we have some event. And it's the difference between that base of what would have happened had the event not occurred. And so here, with respect to the entertainment strikes, pre-strike production, we've got to look for that, stockpiling. During strike work, everything doesn't stop. So you have post-production, distribution, reruns, other things that might be happening during the strike, post-strike production, catching up, and importantly, especially this time, industry dynamics. What else was happening that's gonna conflate the data about the economic impact? And so this is about what is the base. We're gonna look at two things with this preliminary data, but I want to emphasize this is preliminary, and we really need more data because we're only a few months out from the end of the strikes. But this is days of filming from Film LA. The top is television, the bottom is feature films. That yellow, of course, is COVID, where everything was shut down. If you look over on the left, and we'll just focus on television for the moment, what you see is there's actually a downward trend. This is the beginning of restructuring. And so COVID was a surprise event, but you would expect afterwards a lot of catch up. And you do see on the right-hand side some catch up, and then this plummets all the way going into the strike. There isn't any stockpiling going on. What's going on? Restructuring in the industry. So it's kind of well known in the industry that there was oversupply of content. It's well known for all of us who go on some platform and look at all of the offerings and we don't know what to watch, right? So that restructuring to make the business plans hunt was going on, and you don't get any real stockpiling before. And if you look just to the right, where you only get a couple of months of data because the last strike ended in the first week of November, you don't really see any recovery, but that may be premature. Okay, so if we take another look, a different way of looking at this, and this is employment in film, TV, and streaming, and you see kind of the big drop there in 2020, comes back up, and it's actually at a very high level, and then it starts dropping going into that shaded area, which is the strike. So employment also is dropping instead of going up in anticipation, and it kind of recovers a little bit, but not much. And so what we did was just to get some picture based on these data. Again, it's preliminary, it's not much data, but we estimated a trend. And if you remember, in both of those graphs, you're kind of going along slowly, and then it turns down. You get an acceleration of the restructuring in the industry. So we estimated a nonlinear trend to pick that up, and took that as the normal, and took the difference between what was actually happening in all of 2023 and where that trend was. And when you do that, using some heroic assumptions, you get from film days a loss of about 1.6 billion, and from employment a loss of 1.4 billion. There's one thing that we did with employment. Many workers in Hollywood are independent contractors, and there's an estimate of the number of independent contractors as a percentage of the total workforce. We assumed that during the strike, every one of those independent contractors was unemployed. And so we took that out as part of the cost. And that brought us to that 1.4 billion. So we get, with this preliminary data, about 1.4 to 1.6 billion dollars, not the 3 to 6 billion that's been quoted. But there's some caveats. We need to see what happens in 2024 and 2025. If this stays at this low level, at the same level as 2023, then the only direct impact, this is not the impact on caterers and restaurants, but the only direct impact is to the extent to which the strikes accelerated the restructuring, right? But that restructuring is most of it. So there's very little impact. In fact, there was some maybe cynical statements made about the producers were not that eager for the strike to end because they needed to restructure, and this kind of helped them along. They didn't need the extra content. I say cynical because, you know, a lot of things were said during the strike, and maybe most of them not necessarily true. But if we see in 2024 and 2025 a big jump up, then the base that we're measuring from goes up, and these numbers are too low. So this is preliminary. It does suggest the numbers were really too large because this is conflated with the restructuring. Where this comes in, stay tuned. In a year, we'll give you an update, but it's too early really to tell. But what is clear is the economic impact is much less than what was being quoted in the newspapers. Okay, so with that, that brings us to 10:06. So we have a few minutes for questions for William and myself. And so let's start with Thomas has got a question.
Thank you. Thomas reads excellent. It's very, very look at China. It's not what you hear about most. I'm wondering if the nearshoring and friendshoring, how will that affect, how do you see that affect our economic relationship with the Europeans? I mean, we are certainly very bullish on investments coming from Europe and business and economic relationships. I see Germany not taking advantage so much of the friendshoring. Do you see us getting more of a benefit of friendshoring with the Europeans, or is it going elsewhere?
Yeah, that's very good question, big question. Yeah, this involves some kind of geopolitical politics, kind of a discussion. Yeah, and actually, right now, I think in response to this kind of a de-risk policy between US and China, we are seeing China actually trying to explore their export market in Europe, in Latin America, in other parts of Asia, and they are succeeding so far. Yeah, because US-China trade, China's export to the US market actually accounts for most of the trade surplus for the China's export. And right now, this kind of source is gonna decline in the future. So right now, China is working very hard. But let me just give you an example. Right now, EU is doing this investigation about the EV export, China's EV export to the European market. So I don't know what the result will be, because eventually, I think China's overcapacity and this industrial policy subsidy probably will hurt other parts of the world. So my personal take is what United States is doing actually is in the right direction. So maybe Europe will follow suit. So that's just my personal take.
And you know, one more comment on that question. The former head of the European Chamber of Commerce in Beijing commented on just this, that European EU companies are now relocating or investing in Southeast Asia for exactly that reason. Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, I want to ask you about your forecast going forward on growth with respect to both legal and undocumented workers, specifically around the economy actually outperforming. And then second, what's your evaluation of the recent increase in overall productivity?
Okay, so the first question was, you know, what about immigration? Certainly immigration has increased our labor force. We see that, and some of our growth is attributed to just having more people. Immigration of highly skilled folks increases productivity as well. What happens, so we went through about a 5-year period with very little immigration, very little legal immigration. Do we go back to that? That's certainly going to ramp down the growth rates. So our assumption is that we now are back to kind of our average immigration levels, and that it stays there. But you're right, if it drops, that's going to impact growth rates. Recent increases in productivity, one of the things that the labor shortage did, particularly in the services, was present companies with higher wages, and they began to become more capital intensive and increase productivity. And we can see that in restaurants, right? We have fewer servers and we use QR codes, right? So one server now has more tables than before, productivity has gone up. And I think that a shift towards more capital intensive production is really going on. The big wild card is, what is AI going to do to productivity? And right, Goldman is estimating some pretty interesting numbers on that. So we have time for maybe one or possibly two more questions. There's a question right here in front.
With regard to the money that Congress is considering for the war in Ukraine and has allocated in the past, how much of that comes back to U.S. aerospace industry for weapons and other supplies? So it's actually a plus for the U.S.
Right. So this is not in the defense budget, but it sort of is, because the way this works is dollar bills aren't handed out. HIMARS are handed out. F-15s are handed out. And then those need to be replaced. And so that money is allocated for replacement of that equipment. And of course, that disproportionately comes to California, but also the other states that I was talking about. In the first put of the budget, which of course is never going to be the end budget, there's a 1% increase in defense spending, but that doesn't count the bills that have gone through for foreign assistance in the form of transfer of already existing military equipment.
Not a gift, so some people buy. Handing money out.
It's handing war material out, and we have to replace it. And so with the HIMARS example, they weren't expecting a big increase in demand. So now they're expanding their factory and expanding production. So all of that is a stimulus to the U.S. economy. That's the thing that's not interest sensitive, that is in part really driving growth here. Okay, so
Question.
yes.
Question on the impact strikes. Did you factor in at all? Sorry, thank you. Did you factor in at all the potential of upcoming strikes, the upcoming potential strikes with IATSE and Teamsters?
So the answer is, did we factor in the potential for an upcoming strike?
In terms of impact on forecasts.
So the answer is no. Typically, we don't build in that. We might build it in the sense of there's going to be kind of slower growth potentially. But as you saw, if you get stockpiling, you actually get faster growth. And then if the strike doesn't happen, you get slower growth. So that's really hard to build into any kind of analytical forecast. So back to the short answer, no. And okay, yes.
Really quickly, did you guys, for the California forecast, factor in the $20 fast food wage increase and potential kind of knock-on impact of that the increase that's going to happen in April?
So not explicitly, but the way in which we expanded employment in leisure and hospitality, yes. So we're going to get an expansion in leisure and hospitality as Asian tourists come back to San Francisco and Los Angeles, and as more people have jobs and are out spending. But that's going to be a damper on that. And it's also, to Joe's question, that's going to increase the pressure to automate in the services industry. We have time for one more. Do we have one more question? Anybody? We answered all your questions. Oh, we have one question right there in the back.
You talk about the summary, the AI tech is the darlings of VCs.
Mhm.
Can you expand upon that a little bit more? And what do you mean by the darling?
Okay, so that's just me making up words. But when you look at where venture capital money is going, as well as private equity, you see that there is a huge investment in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. And what is expanding, I went through that list of 10, and there are a lot on there that are AI. That's what I meant by that. That is an attractor. So AI, investment in AI, research in AI is disproportionately and not just by a little bit, by a lot in the Bay Area, in particular, San Francisco.
How about here in LA? Med tech?
I think you're going to see it in entertainment, and we're going to, you know, our panel is much more knowledgeable than I am on this, so we're going to hear about that after the break. Aerospace, we're definitely seeing it in aerospace and in med tech, and that's not just LA, but that's Orange County and San Diego as well. So and you do see, you know, venture capital money. It's kind of all down the coast in the tech centers in California, in Boston and New York, and not much else. And that brings us to break time. We're going to start the second part of the program, really interesting program with our keynotes and our panel, and that's going to be at 10:30. So time to stretch our legs, and we'll start promptly at 10:30. Thank you. So now we're going to turn to technology and issues that are on everyone's mind today. As we began the program today, I did mention that this is joint with the Entertainment and Media Management Center here at UCLA Anderson. And it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and the faculty director of the center, Sanjay Sood. Sanjay is a professor of marketing and is a graduate of University of Illinois in Engineering, Northwestern MBA, and PhD at Stanford, former chair of the faculty here at Anderson. And I'm going to turn it over to Sanjay. Sanjay, welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Artificial intelligence is a topic that everybody's talking about, but few people know where it's going to go. Yesterday, we had the final presentations in my class for entertainment business models. And one of the student teams had developed the first 5 minutes of a movie that they created completely from AI. And so it's kind of scary that they were able to do that so quickly. And it looked nice. So we don't know where the future is going to go, but I'm very happy to introduce my colleague today, Professor Keith Chen. Keith is a professor both in the strategy group and also in the behavioral decision making group here at UCLA Anderson. And for a time, he was the head of data science and economics at Uber. So if you know surge pricing, you can talk to Keith. He's the one who developed that model. On today's keynote, Keith is going to talk about the things that AI can do and the kind of limitations that AI still has. So welcome, Keith.
that was approved for the whole of Los Angeles. So you want to take an autonomous ride hail? You can. Agriculture, fully autonomous farms are now kind of fully online. So you've probably seen some of these videos. We're all kind of comfortable with seeing tractors kind of drive through fields, towing kind of spraying arms and stuff like this. Now there are these huge boxes on the back of these tractors. They drive through the fields. What's going on under? Computer vision and AI is basically making a real-time map of where every carrot growing on every square inch of the farm is. It identifies weeds. It can tell better than a human very quickly. This is a trivial problem for a computer. What's a weed versus what's a carrot? And it's zapping the weeds with lasers and spraying the carrots with fertilizer, right? It's now running at speeds of about 200 times faster than you can do that by human, right? Like just tractor drives through, everything kind of happens, okay? We're gonna think a little bit about what jobs, what's at risk from AI. I'm from my background, I'm kind of particularly interested in the 3% of Americans who drive for a living, because I think pretty soon that's over. And I want to give a little bit of a way of thinking about, but more broadly than that, like what's next, like what falls next. Okay, well, and I know a lot of this audience is particularly interested in entertainment, so I'm going to focus a little bit on that. In order to do that, I want to think a little bit about kind of how do you think about what AI is doing? Okay, Ted Chiang, like a kind of a relatively famous, that's insulting, a famous kind of science fiction author, calls GPT and kind of the experience of that effectively lossy JPEGs. They're imperfect compressions of the world. So you can think of ChatGPT as kind of a lossy JPEG version of the entirety of the internet. And I like that metaphor because, like kind of JPEGs, it's an imperfect compression technology, and you see these artifacts sometimes where they just kind of like fill in where the data is missing. And when AIs hallucinate, they can feel a lot like that. Alison Gopnik, kind of a cognitive scientist, instead thinks of them as kind of cultural technologies, like writing and libraries and internet search engines, were just ways of translating large bodies of human knowledge, making them usable and just kind of like allowing them to communicate across people. But what's interesting is that like that's not what people who develop AI and who have been programming AIs like think is the most natural kind of analogy for what they are. And it's amazing how quickly this has completely taken over. And I think it's interesting to think about this analogy, AI as a shoggoth, okay? Because it's what people who work in the industry find most compelling. What is a shoggoth? It's this like H.P. Lovecraftian image of this effectively unknowable monster. What is? I'm not going to kind of summarize the literature, but the memes, which kind of convey this, is that like people who develop AI think of this as the AI, and this is the these are kind of inside jokes, reinforcement learning from human feedback. These are the things we try and like the kind of controls we try and layer on top of the AI to make it not hallucinate, to make it not kind of compare humans to Hitler, to kind of, not do kind of things we don't like about it. But effectively, the kind of key idea here is that people who program AIs no longer feel like they're programming. The analogy is they feel like they're summoning, like they're like wizards who like understand that in some way I created this thing or I summoned it into the world, but I don't understand how it thinks, and I'm surprised by its power. Okay, I think what's interesting, what's most interesting is that philosophers have also picked up on this and said that in some sense, when we turn over control of our world to these new kind of creations, and we're surprised by that in some sense that like that's not a new experience. That in some sense, like we've been doing that for a long time. This is a meme where kind of this shoggoth, is replaced by Hobbes's Leviathan. The basic analogy here is that the first industrial revolution, like effectively when we left feudalism, we did the same thing. We turned over to kind of like modern capitalist economies, and these complex economic systems, control of our collective lives in a way that we didn't entirely understand. Okay, that's depressing. Let's moving on from that, using these analogies, let's think a little bit about what the best AIs fail at. Okay, like we've just talked a lot about their kind of capabilities, and I'm going to have to put like very precise dates on every kind of example, because anytime you kind of like look at these things, like this thing is moving so fast. So examples from GPT-3 in 2020. Okay, AIs fail terrifically at psychological reasoning. So just, think about an AI as like very fancy autocomplete. ChatGPT, we kind of all understand that. Ask ChatGPT to summarize, like everything we know about the wave function in quantum physics. It does an amazingly good job. All right. Ask GPT, Janet and Penny went to the store to get a present for Jack. Janet says, I'd like to buy Jack a top. Don't get Jack a top, says Penny. He has a top. All right. Ask GPT to continue, and it says nonsense. It says like, he has a top. He will get a top. I will get Jack a top, says Janet. It completely misses the logic of like one person explaining to the other, you shouldn't get Jack a top because he already has a top. Or physical reasoning. You have a small dinner party. You want to serve dinner in the living room. The dining room table is wider than the doorway. So to get it into the living room, you will have to remove the door. You have a table saw. You cut the door in half and remove the top half. It has no kind of deep model of what a living room is, or like what a table, the physics of a table feels like, or like how one, if you intend to kind of have more people in the dining room, like what that is. And the idea here is kind of, I think very much resonates with the Shoggoth model. One way to think about like these AI models and these deep learning models is to think of them as, I feel this way a lot, actually. I have a 3-year-old son, and like watching my 3-year-old son learn is a lot like what I feel like when I train an AI model. Is that in some deep sense, like, these AIs are kind of these unknown, kind of almost Martian intelligences. And what you get back is a deep sense that both, they're learning incredibly fast, but that in some sense they see us as completely alien and are incapable of kind of forming what humans actually quite naturally do, very simple physical models of the world and very simple psychological models of other people. Let me give you some, I'll skip that. Let me give you an example, okay? Okay, so we're all kind of interested in, this was just not 1 month ago now, so it already feels kind of like outdated. But this is one of OpenAI's kind of premier examples from Sora. Okay, so the prompt that generates this, and let's actually look at, a stylish woman walks down a Tokyo street filled with warm, glowing neon and animated city signage. She wears a black leather jacket, a long red dress, black boots, carries a black purse, sunglasses, red lipstick. She walks confidently and casually. The street is damp and reflective, creates a mirror effect and colorful lights. Many pedestrians walk about. You just ask Sora, turn that into a video. Okay, that description. And this is what it generates. Let's just watch this for a second. What do you think? It's pretty awesome, right? To get you in the right mindset of like, how do you think about the capability and how do you think about its weaknesses? Like, in some deep sense, Sora has basically watched every video on the internet, but without having lived life as a human. So I want you to think about it as almost like, as if a Martian was a superhumanly intelligent Martian, just watched every video on the internet, okay, without context, and then connecting those words made this video. What are some flaws that you see? Well, first of all, if you look at the signage, like none of those are real words, okay? Like if you like what is that? That's not Korean. That's not Japanese. It just kind of looks like what a Martian thinks Korean and Japanese or some kind of scripted Asian language looks like, okay? The arm looks very strange. Like, it's seen a lot of arms in sleeves, but it doesn't quite get how they articulate, because it has no experience of having an elbow, okay? If you look at like when people are supposed to mill about, like if you pay attention to kind of the people in the background, they feel a little weird, like they have no purpose, like they just kind of seem to be zombies kind of like following this woman through the street, okay? Let me kind of give you another example that kind of, I think, maybe illustrates this even better, okay? So here's the prompt. A person in 1930s Hollywood sits at a desk. They pick up a cigarette case, remove a cigarette, light it with a lighter. The person takes a long drag, sits back in the chair, golden age of Hollywood. I want to give you a sense of like what, you're trying to give Sora a sense of what the video should look like, black and white film style. All right, sorry. Can you play this? Sorry, okay. We'll watch it on repeat for a second. So Sora clearly gets that you want this person to smoke, but doesn't quite know how smoking works, right? Like it's seen enough smoke in videos to get what smoke is supposed to look like, but the physics of, well, you put the cigarette in your mouth, you bring the lighter up to the thing, you take a drag, and that's what produces the smoke. Like the physics of that, the world model is missing. Okay, the world model is missing. You can look at for some other things, right? So for example, it's seen a lot of picture of old-timey telephones. If you look closely, it's got two handsets. The cable plugs into the lamp. There's various realistic looking things on the desk, but if you look carefully, it's not clear at all what those things are, right? They're like things that kind of look like hole punchers or stuff like this. But I mean, you could think about this like if you showed your kid a floppy disk or like an old Atari system, it would it's kind of like a child trying to figure out like, what the hell is this thing kind of thing, right? From an outsider's perspective, okay? So the deep issue here is that in some deep sense, like these AIs, they're operating without a world model. Okay, like if we're almost kind of like, inductive learners about our world, they're kind of deductive. They just kind of like looking down on the world. They just recognize kind of patterns. People seem to like to put these tubes in their mouth, and then like white billowing smoke comes out of them. The psychological components are some of the most kind of weird. Let me kind of like show you this. But last video. A grandmother with neatly combed gray hair stands behind a colorful birthday cake with numerous candles and a wood dining room table. Expression is one of pure joy and happiness. Okay, well, I mean, we'll see whether that's what's reflected in her face. Happy glow in her eyes, several happy friends, family sitting at the table can be seen. Those people are out of focus. So listen, it's really getting the kind of staging, it's getting the composition. I mean, it's learning from some pretty good videos, right? Like, can we play this one? Okay, just watch it on repeat. Okay. What exactly are you supposed to be doing when you parse your lips near a candle? Like what happens? Here, play it on repeat again. Look at the people celebrating in the background. Okay, this is the like real thing. Like, what are they doing with their hands? Like, what are you supposed to be like kind of, am I like clicking my fingers at you somehow? Like, I'm not sure what I'm communicating. Am I sign languaging to you? Am I clapping? Like, what's happening? Okay. And I think the thing you have to understand is that like, if you don't actually have an intuitive psychological model of a human, right? This is what like a party looks like to you, right? It's what's interesting is like what AI is almost teaching us. It's like, what does a Martian psychopath think a birthday like is, or like looks like, or is doing, right? Like it's exactly this kind of, so, one way to think about this, okay, let's take, let's think about those as the kind of like limitations, and then let's think a little bit about like future of entertainment kind of production. Already, many people in this room already know, like, take a show like The Mandalorian, already you have kind of like actors basically walking in these rooms that are just huge, like the walls are just OLED screens. And everything that's in the world around them is just being kind of produced, right? Like you don't have to film in a desert anymore. It looks better if you film them in a big, basically big like room that's just coated in OLED kind of monitors, right? In some deep sense, you could think within a few years, all right, the entire if you ask an AI, take this book and produce a first shot movie script from this. Trivial, okay? Because that's compression, right? That's taking a lot of information that's already in the book and just kind of like morphing it into a new form and actually producing in some sense less information that's in the whole thing, right? Producing the backdrop, behind the actor, where where people are going to be like kind of real actors are going to be interacting in the front. Trivial, right? Like it can do that, like, from really, really simple descriptions, right? What it's not going to be able to do, right? What it still seems like is going to be really, really far off, right? Is any task where in some deep sense, what you need is a rich world model, right? Like it's not gonna, huge Christopher Nolan fan, right? It's not going to be able to replace, in some deep sense, like, anyone who has to ask a question like this story, like, what is psychologically rich and interesting about this? And what like small perturbation of our real world would make this particularly interesting to people who actually have like a real human model of this world. I don't know and so in some deep sense it's like the people who are going to win tremendously from that. Well, first of all, the whole industry becomes infinitely more productive. But the real winners are people who have that who really have that deep world model. Because in some deep sense, like everything that doesn't require that deep world model is going to become completely trivial. And anything that requires that deep world model and is a complement in kind of producing kind of these interesting kind of things to, kind of automated tasks that don't require the world model are going to be, I don't have a lot of time left, right? I actually have like, I have 15? Okay. I could talk a little bit about like what firms, let me skip past this for a second because maybe I can come back to this. Like, other amazing things that like, this actually was just from this week. New generative, like big changes that are coming, new generative models. Again, like I think you go into this kind of industry if you were a huge science fiction fan when you were a kid. One cool, besides transporters, which are the coolest technology, the second coolest technology, from Star Trek, okay, maybe phasers, but the universal translator, these pins you put on your lapel, and you can just talk with anything, anyone, any kind of species. Just this week, kind of, generative AI model. Facebook/Meta, now we're supposed to call it, shows this amazing, shows this amazingly advanced kind of thing. Actually, would you play the left video? I won't even spoil it.
So glad you are here. I am so happy to see you. Me alegra mucho que estés aquí. Me alegra mucho verte.
So that the first part of that clip was the person speaking in English. The second part of the clip was an AI attempting to translate what that person said into Spanish, matching their voice, matching their tone, and matching the emotive mood of what they're saying. Okay? Like Google Translate has already been great and great for years at taking text, right? Like one of my favorite authors, Haruki Murakami, like, writes in Japanese and has this like effectively professional translator, Jay Rubin, who has spent his life trying to say like, well, what should Haruki Murakami feel like in English? And like translate his books into English. We all read, in some sense, Jay Rubin's compression of Murakami, not like Murakami, if you're reading him in English, right? With like already 4 years ago, if you were to randomly show people Google Translate's translation of Haruki Murakami, 2 times out of, this is not to insult Jay Rubin, 2 times out of 3 people prefer it to Jay Rubin's translation. Okay. The real advance here is that it's starting to get better at just in real time, taking what you're saying and just basically transforming your voice and your mode of tone into a different language, right? And like spoken. You can see, can you play the right-hand one?
Turn down the volume. The baby just fell asleep.
She's whispering. So maybe.
Baisse le volume. Le bébé s'est endormi.
Maybe that video was too quiet to hear, but So think about like, the advantages, kind of, that Zoom is already kind of bringing us in terms of kind of being able to communicate across great distances. Now imagine that you can like Zoom with anybody in the world, no matter what language they're speaking, with effectively zero latency. Like they see you speaking Japanese and you see them speaking English. And it just feels, completely natural. Okay, let's get to the. So let's talk a little bit about kind of, big changes then that we can see kind of coming. This was a project that I was on the kind of planning committee and they headed up before it failed for various reasons. We had to sell it. But kind of, for a long time at Uber, we had to think hard about, well, self-driving technology is getting better at a very fast pace. Actually, didn't get better as fast as we had hoped, okay? But how do we think about kind of obviously having to pivot our core business model away from being a two-sided platform where we don't own the cars and we just connect kind of human drivers with human riders and help them kind of like kind of interact with each other, which we were already using a tremendous amount of AI to kind of help mediate that interaction, to a slightly different model where what would probably have to become the case is that it would be efficient for us to own the cars because these cars are quite expensive, right? That's like a $200,000 SUV where over half the cost is just like the equipment on the roof, right? In some sense, let's replace an extremely low fixed cost but high marginal cost technology for providing rides. That is like the human driver brings their car, but they cost Uber, say like roughly kind of $2 or $3 a mile to produce a trip, with a very high fixed cost but extremely low marginal cost technology for providing rides. This $200,000 car that then costs like 15 cents a mile to provide rides. Okay. This is not like to say, like, this is now reality. Like I said, like within the last month, this turned on all for the entirety of LA. Anyone here, if you want, you can download Waymo, right, the app, and a car will arrive with nobody in the front seat. It's quite eerie, okay? And it'll drive you to, it'll drive you to wherever you want to go, take you to the restaurant in downtown LA, okay? Let me say, like, in terms of like thinking about what that disrupts, many of you probably already have, okay, so this is the kind of, ride hailing is kind of, in some sense, the closest and easiest to experience kind of way that this may change, the way that kind of we get around cities, that we kind of like move around the world. What is the potential impact of that? I mean, 40,000 people a year in the United States die in motor vehicle accidents. If this is even, when this, Waymo is currently, kind of already at a point where it's probably about twice as safe as that, right? So that's alone like 20,000 people in the United States next year, if this kind of technology becomes quite widespread, that don't die. That's a pretty big thing. But tell you the truth, I think the larger and almost immediate impact is, whereas this technology is still kind of, like we said, like, 78% of radiologists, where this technology is already, still maybe about like the 60th, 80th, somewhere between the 60th and 80th percentile of human drivers. This technology, like putting fully autonomous kind of large distance shipping trucks, that's already basically at the 100th percent of human ability. Why? Because driving on a highway is a much simpler problem than driving on a city. And the thing that causes failures amongst human drivers is not like some complex reasoning task. It's like falling asleep or losing attention, right? Like a human driver just has a hard time like doing this task, the 14th hour they've been doing it, like, on the road, okay? But being able to replace that with like, you put $100,000 on an SUV, right? That's a big kind of change. These trucks are already super expensive. Putting $100,000 worth of technology on one of these trucks maybe keeping the human driver inside, but letting them be kind of doing kind of, logistics, kind of, planning routes, working through packages and kind of thinking through things in the back. That's already an extremely kind of cost-effective kind of technology. How do you think about that as kind of displacing? Well, the political economy of that is pretty bad. Let me give you kind of an example of this. So this is like, from the census ACS data. What I'm showing you here is a map of the United States, where what I've just placed on top of every state is in the US Census, what is the most common job of somebody who lives in that state, right? There's a couple of interesting things that jump out here. Washington, D.C. is the only place where lawyer is like the most common job. Utah, it turns out, is like remarkably full of software developers. Alaska, maybe that's a surprise, primary school teachers, right? And in like the Northeast, like there's a lot of that too. There's aging states with like nursing aides are kind of like the most common thing. But what's interesting here is that the vast majority of the landmass, and in fact, the vast majority of electoral college votes in the United States, the most common job in those areas is truck driver. Okay. So if you want to think about like the most immediately politically fraught or shocking kind of impact of AI, is what happens if within the next 5 years, like that job just ends, right? Like it no longer makes sense for a human to do that, right? Like what political effect does that have? What impact does that have on kind of like how accepting people are going to be of the technology? Yeah. That's what I think is kind of, that's probably like, from a political economic perspective, like the largest impact of AI within the next kind of like few years. Okay, let me say like, maybe I could take questions, or I could like, I was gonna. 5 minutes. Okay, I think 5 minutes is already too little to take questions. Yeah, thank you guys very much. I'm happy to take questions for any time this window.
Any questions for Keith? Please.
So I've always had a question that, should the government play any role in the regulations of AI? Because the more the AI, the more it will replace human beings, and the more the unemployment will be there in the country. So should the government play any role in this?
Well, okay, so it's an interesting question. I think there's a couple of potentially important roles for government regulation here, right? I think the most obvious is going to be, and I think the thing that a lot of attention is being paid to, is the worry of misinformation and just like rapid transformations of our information channels. Okay, like a lot of, and this is kind of nerdy, but a lot of software developers basically say, well, now that we let people just watch videos like crazy, right? Like they're just like, oh, whatever you want. And it seems perfectly natural. Like, pull up a video on your phone and just kind of watch it. But we don't let computers, we understand that it's incredibly dangerous if you let any computer just immediately download software that, that's been completely unverified and just run it. But in some sense, like when you watch these videos, you're kind of running software that somebody else wrote without checking it on your own brain. Right. And then the question is like, as the technology for like really understanding how that kind of affects human cognition, what it impresses you with, and kind of stuff like this, like, like I think there is going to be a tremendous amount of, deep, hard thinking about what, if we can basically kind of really train AIs to understand like what is very kind of gripping to the human mind, right? Like what is like, what maximizes engagement, and then we kind of unleash that, and because of generative models, like the kind of production cycle of that and the iteration cycle of that becomes just kind of trivial. That's obviously going to be like something we have to think hard about. What I just talked about in terms of kind of labor, traditionally economists think, well, we should, all of in every previous epoch, kind of, major technological advances create more jobs than they destroy, because, the degree to which everybody becomes just increasingly more productive, because the things that we're good at are just complements to the things that technology happens. So in some sense, it's a whole labor augmenting technology, suggests that we really shouldn't try and hold back kind of the development, or, really kind of trying to do that. I think that's also true of this technology, right? Kind of AI, kind of like I just said. On the other hand, like the possibility of incredibly rapid displacement may be something that we need to think hard about. Like I said, like if over 5/6 of the US landmass is suddenly going to experience kind of, the main job that people do in those regions, just disappears, that's pretty disruptive. And it's important to kind of maybe think that through. Yeah, other questions, yeah.
The jobs that you showed on the map, displacing trucks, truck drivers, and retail are pretty rudimentary, kind of go and just do. What about business decisions and staffs, legions and legions of staff that prepare all of the staff work, the pros and cons, the research and everything? When on the curve does AI be in a position to ask the right questions?
When does AI, well, okay, so one way to think about your question is perhaps have never experienced, the US produces, 6 times more food, than we did kind of 100 years ago, but we employ 20% of the workforce doing it, right? So, we're kind of used to somewhat more routine tasks being displaced, right? What happens when there's no longer a thing called a radiologist, right? Or no longer, various kinds of what we used to think of as relatively high skill jobs, so lawyers. What happens if basically that's just done, that certainly paralegal, right? What happens when that's basically over? I mean, I think in some sense what we're experiencing already, what a lot of us are experiencing with ChatGPT and kind of generative models and their rapid kind of advance, Sora kind of examples of this, is we're learning a lot more maybe uncomfortable facts about what things that we've been doing all along that in some deep sense are not that hard, are basically just summarizing a whole bunch of stuff that, without really having to understand it very deeply, summarizing a whole bunch of stuff that you've just kind of been asked to read, comb through, I mean, I think the way to think about the future is we're going to have to grapple with the answer to that, the potentially quite uncomfortable answer to that question, very quickly, very soon, because yeah, it's going to be inescapable. What you're doing, can easily be done by a chip no more powerful than what you carry in your smartphone, and 200 times faster than you can do it.
Would the AI be able to look at situations for a company and say, what are the critical business decisions that we have to confront operationally, strategically, et cetera?
It's almost impossible to answer that question fully, but what you should think is which of those decisions that we think about high level decision makers and firms having to make actually are quite in some sense routine, and which of those decisions are actually quite difficult. And we have intuitions about that. The answer will become obvious quite quickly.
Okay, Keith, we could go on and on.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. I'll be there.
So it's also my pleasure to introduce Jay Tucker. Jay is the executive director for the Center of Media, Entertainment, and Sports. We work together very closely, and Jay's put together a very interesting panel that's going to discuss the impact of AI on the entertainment industry. So, Jay?
Okay, so I'm the expert at not being the expert. So I brought in a few friends to come and talk a little bit more about how artificial intelligence and technology innovations in general are impacting the entertainment sector more specifically. So as my panelists get mic'd up, Jeffrey, why don't you head on back? And Andy, let me just say a few words about where we are right now. I love Keith's analogy about summoning some creature. I don't know how many of you are Naruto fans, but like summoning jutsu, right? You got your big chief frog that gets to come out and help you out when you need it. And I think that for generations, younger generations of consumers and workers, they look at AI as an opportunity to amplify and augment what they can do. It makes them more efficient. It makes them more knowledgeable. It makes it easier to connect. It simplifies workflows. But obviously for people in the business right now, right, in established workflows, roles, jobs, et cetera, those people feel like, hey, you're upsetting the apple cart, right? There are some things that are changing, things that may be getting broken or disrupted that we can't bring back, we can't fix, right? That creates a lot of friction and static, you know, and a certain amount of unrest in the space across the whole industry, not just with respect to the creative community, but also in the business community, production community, et cetera, you know, across the entertainment business. So our goal today was to talk a little bit more, one, about kind of what does that landscape look like? How do people embrace technology? The technology of the day that we're talking about today, AI, like what does that do within the industry? And more specifically, you saw examples from Keith Chen talking about Sora, but we'll get into like, how can AI be helpful? And then we'll also talk a little bit more about what does that mean organizationally and strategically for the business, right? So without further ado, let me just introduce my panelists. You've got Jeffrey Thompson right next to me. Jeffrey's currently at Oracle, but he spent time at Disney and in other places where he's been really at the intersection of technology and media. I asked Jeffrey to come here specifically for that reason, because he knows more about how these things happen, right? We've gone through a few different eras, from big data to AR and VR and so on, where everybody in Hollywood thought, oh, this is going to change everything. And I'm going to let Jeffrey talk a little bit more about what it actually changed and how much change there was and what we think this next wave is going to look like. I've got Daisy Stahl, who's not only an entertainment banker, right? But she has worked in entertainment on the financial side for years and years and years. So when we start talking about economics and the money, you've got Daisy who will be able to talk about, well, what does that mean in terms of business opportunity, investment, risk, and so on. And then I also asked a longtime friend, Andy Wallenstein, to come and talk as well. So I met Andy years ago when we collaborated on a big data conference, back when big data was a thing, like the data was big. So it was a thing. And since then, Andy, I mean, you know, he's done a couple of small things. He was the co-editor-in-chief of Variety magazine. Now he started a separate division within Variety called Variety Intelligence Platform, where they do insights, special research, et cetera. And a lot of it, in fact, is focused on innovation and change and what does that mean? And they get the numbers and the data and stuff like that. So actually, I'm going to start on the end with Andy and you know, with the question, could you talk a little bit more about kind of what you're seeing and how people are feeling about, you know, current innovation and what's happening?
Sure. AI is obviously the impact in entertainment is topic A right now. I don't know if you guys are following what's going on right now in South by Southwest, where it seems like the conversation around there is really polarizing people, and filmmakers are having a very strong reaction to it, but a lot of the innovation types out there are also evangelizing on behalf of AI, and it's a big conversation out there. You know, I think you're seeing on the one hand, people who are very scared, and understandably so, given the disruption and the displacement that it could represent. And on the other extreme, you're seeing a lot of people who are really excited about the opportunities, because there are some opportunities, and the innovation that that could bring. Those are the extremes. I think what you're going to see, though, is everything in the middle is going to happen, and it's going to happen to a lot of different areas of the business at a lot of different times. This is not, it's very easy to traffic in generalities, but that's not going to be the story of AI in entertainment. And also, as new as this all is, this really is actually the classic industry story of Hollywood, which is always been the story of innovation going back to, the advent of sound and how the business changes, does get severely impacted. This is a story of winners and losers. There will be losers, and but hopefully emerging and triumphing and perhaps coming back bigger and better than ever.
Love that. So you all have been tracking this stuff. Do you have any data you could share?
Yes, I do. And I think it actually dovetails nicely. If we could queue up, dovetails nicely with what the previous speaker was talking about. This is fresh out of the data oven. We just ran this last week with Harris X, one of the leading surveyors out there. And we were talking about Sora, right? First thing we wanted to know is we took some of those viral clips that you saw that Sora OpenAI had put out there. We also took some stock footage clips that were made by actual humans. And the first thing we wanted to know is, can humans actually tell the difference between what is made by humans with a regular old camera and these Sora clips? And what we saw was, indeed, people struggled to tell the difference. And when we randomly showed these 8 clips, you could see from these results that there is certainly very easily confused returns in terms of what they can or can't see. Can you go to the next? I want to breeze through these because I want to give everyone a chance to speak. And what we also saw when we asked is, people really want to see labels on this content. And we asked them across not just video, but any kind of content that could be altered, whether it was writing, sound, music. People want to see labels, and it was part of a larger call for government regulation. And if we could now move to the next slide. Regulation in general was something that we gave them a whole number of different scenarios here. There was not one particular kind of regulation that stood out from the rest. The number one was about creating accountability rules with regard to AI outputs, but we laid out this whole different range of scenarios, and you saw even across age groups, no particular age group, obviously as the older types, I think there was more of a lean towards regulation, but even among the younger, there was a clear interest in that. There's concern out there. It doesn't matter whether you're 18 or 68, there is an interest in regulation. And lastly, one more slide. Obviously, there is a big concern about jobs. I mean, this is the strongest, clearest indication that there is a real, and look at the way the question is actually framed here, where we said, strong regulation could stifle innovation, and that there could possibly be more jobs that could come as a result. Still, very clear indication that there is implement strong regulations to protect jobs across the board, across all demos. By the way, the QR codes are there if you want, in case we at VIP are always putting out tons of data regarding AI, so make sure you queue that up. But just wanted to give you a taste of what we are seeing. We're going to continue to follow this stuff up. We're actually going to have some more surveys coming up targeted on the industry, because consumers are one thing. We want to hear what the industry is going to have to say.
Thanks for that, Andy. So Daisy, we are down at the level of the consumer. Now I want to talk about what this means institutionally with respect to, financing the creation of content, right? Can you talk a little bit about how AI specifically, but kind of this technology, this technological innovation in general impacts the future viability of filmed entertainment projects?
Sure. So just to give you a little bit of background, I've been in the space during the past 25 years, and our industry has been transforming the whole time. So back when I started, was in banking, and then I moved to a studio. And at the time, the studio was still selling or monetizing DVDs with Netflix. So if you think about the technology of what Netflix and their innovation and what they did, at that time, DVDs were going down. And people in our studio said, Netflix doesn't know what they want to be yet. Well, they certainly demonstrated that they took the leading step in an innovative and transformative way of viewing content, which is completely transformed how we as consumers now consume content today. So what I would suggest is, with respect to technologies, we have to find a way to utilize that, monetize content, protect intellectual property, but find the balance in order to do so. So with respect to AI, I was thinking about, how do we approach this in a balanced way? Fear is not productive. During those transformative years, I came to tell myself, both in banking and the transformation of the entertainment industry, be comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because it's constantly uncomfortable, not knowing where the next path is going to lead you. But if you try to think in advance, that's where you can feel balanced and positive. So last night I was thinking about all the possible ways that AI could help, rather than all the jobs that are going to be lost. So if you think just kind of top line and what AI can produce, it might have a disproportionate impact on below the line workers, right? Not above the line. But if you think about the use of AI in the day-to-day of what a producer does, a producer has to determine on an economic level whether to greenlight a project, whether it's an independent producer or a major studio. And what does greenlighting a project do? It goes back to spreadsheets, data aggregation. What is the historic performance of a specific genre, specific budget, specific talent, A, B, C, or whatever? Can AI more efficiently aggregate that data and be used as a tool for a producer or a studio to determine the budget, the genre, the talent, the how much is it going to take to make this movie, and to have efficiencies? And it's still going to get down to a gut, right? Studio executives going to say, okay, I don't care what this model tells me. I mean, they do that already. They have a gut, and sometimes they are right and the model is wrong. So it could be used as an efficient tool. The other aspect is, if you're an independent producer with a limited budget and limited capital sources to produce your content, and how we finance content, at least from a senior banking perspective, is dramatically different than it was in 1998 when I started in film finance. So if an independent producer can utilize AI to shave down their budget because they have a limited capital source, they could shave down the budget so they're fully covered. And that budget, incremental savings, maybe a couple $1 million, is the difference between making the movie and not making the movie. That can be transformative. You can get your content made, and it's a removal of a barrier to the true independence out there.
Okay, so two things that I heard that I want to test with Jeffrey here. The first is this idea of using tech versus using your gut, right? And for me, I believe, I've said the same thing with Andy back in the day about AI. I believe in the bionic gut, right? I think that if people have natural talents or natural insights, things that you understand about culture, et cetera, that you never kind of paper over that, right? You always want to leverage people's unique individual talents. But at the same time, if you can use technology to make them better, stronger, faster, great, right? The second piece, when you talk about the idea of using artificial intelligence as a way to streamline the cost of production, right? There's this question about, well, okay, so then where in production is that going to happen, and how would we see the benefit, and what would that look like? So Jeffrey, I want to just test these hypotheses with you. In your experience, are there specific areas where adding technology, adding artificial intelligence, we can either enhance somebody's ability to get something to screen, or lower costs, or find efficiencies?
Thank you. I will tell you, strap on, get ready. I think that we are at an inflection point for lots of reasons. Now, we have used, let's not we always keep saying, you know, AI. We've been using AI for a decade, right? AI is a $300 billion business globally, folks. It's going to go to about 700 billion to 1.2 trillion, depending on whose mathematics you're listening to. But we've been arguing about this and using it previously, right? We're doing audience targeting, we do market analysis, we're doing international. Think about all the languages that we focus on, translation, chat bots. Every time you go to your bank now, so we're using it. There's a big inflection point that's changed, and that is Snapchat. What do I mean by Snapchat? Snapchat started using artificial intelligence to do their little teeth and their little ears and started getting AI out to the marketplace in a very easy way that kids could use. Now you go forward to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT means I'm a student. I want to do a resume. I want to talk more like Shakespeare. I can just ask ChatGPT, and in this very quick 30 seconds, it can transform what my hope in product is. So the leveraging of the inflection point that we're looking at is how these tools are used. Because on the backside, B2B, business to business ecosystem, we've been using AI. On the front end is now where we're like, whoa, this is going to be where the growth is. So let's go to Hollywood in particular. You guys saw that Sora video where the person prompts, the specific video on, show me something that a lady walking down the street. Do you know how much that scene would cost in a traditional Hollywood set? You know how much planning would take? That would be planned over a number of days, location, settings. That's an expensive scene, folks, right? Are you shutting down Manhattan, New York City? Are you renting the lot on Warner Brothers? And now I have this tool that can do it in a few, 20 seconds for basically free. So now let's be careful. We know that there's some flaws, but it was released last month. There's going to still be some flaws, right? However, so you asked the question, so we're going to be exploring these things. We have to, right? When I started my career, I'll never forget trademark attorneys. You'd go to a trademark attorney to find out whether to make a movie or not, or what's the name of the movie? Is it real? Is it available for trademarking? And they'd say, do not use Google. Call the attorneys. Right? 5 years later, you talk to a trademark attorney, an IP attorney, they say, did you Google it? So we're at this interesting inflection point where, we're going a little, there are some real risky opportunities and challenges that we have. But what I can tell you, at my 11 years at Disney, when I was at Disney, we were focused on monetizing and firewalling content. How do we make money off of every window? How do we optimize content, right? Sony, Disney, Discovery, Warner Media, we were all, that whole crew of companies was doing the same thing. And now we are colliding our business models with technology. Our business models are colliding. We collide it with YouTube, where the content is all over the world and it's free. You have to pay for anything, right? And so we've been colliding for a while, and guess what? We better figure it out. As I was driving in, TikTok got, at least the vote to ban TikTok, right? Now, whether that happens or not is not the issue. It's the fact that it's happening because of data. Data is the new gold. If I'm using it to build analytics, if I'm using it to build audiences, if I'm using it to build a movie script or something of that nature, it's super powerful because now I know markets, I know individual psychographics. Let me give you one piece. I'm going too long, but this last piece. Think about diversity of content. And we talk about every time a Disney movie was released, it's going in 100 markets. A BBC documentary goes in 210 territories around the world. So think about all the languages and everything else that has to be focused on when you're launching across the zones and the infrastructure to do that. And think about the fact that now we're saying, wait, we can do this at scale pretty easily with technologies that allows us to compress our time zones and go faster. These are some of the real issues that we're confronting. I think they're going to be wonderful opportunities. There are going to be risks.
Now, it's funny you bring up subtitling and language. There's also localization, from everything from cultural references to certain things that are forbidden in certain markets and so on. And AI can certainly rapidly enhance studios' ability and distributors' ability to make stuff ready for multiple markets without worrying about some of these things that have really tripped up folks in the past. That said, you mentioned this thing about windows. How many of you are familiar with windows of distribution when it comes to entertainment? Yeah, so you might have to unpack that.
Yeah, like if you look at any, so I won't call them old school companies because every traditional media company is transforming, right? We got Max, we got streaming, platforms all over the place. Disney has 3 or 4 streaming platforms, right? But think about how we've started to move our platforms to digital direct to consumer streaming. So you're getting your content over your phone, over your laptop, on your connected television, where we get data from it. Right? There's a big difference, right? So we're verticalizing our distribution, where if you take a look at the old school Hollywood, we would make the movie at Warner Media, right? Then you license it to a movie theater and share revenue. Then you license it to television, then you license it around the world, right? And you'd have a movie window, a theatrical window. Then you'd have a DVD window. Then you'd have, sometimes you have a digital window. Remember, we'd have a hotel window when you used to have hotel, content. You'd have a hotel, you'd have an airplane window. So you had all these different windows to capture revenue. All those things have collapsed. When I started at Disney in 2000, we would release a movie, and the first 90 days was the US, and the next 90 days was Asia, and the next 90 days was Europe. But it took you a year to release a movie around the world. Well, look at Little Mermaid that was launched last year. Launched everywhere in 3 days. Just think about the economics of that, right? And how fast you have to do things in different.
Can I,
Yes.
let me take the content localization notion and take it in a very different direction, because we've been having this very sort of like big dramatic conversation about what AI can do to entertainment, and having it on these sort of very sort of big dramatic terms of the wholesale displacement of the entire production process. But we also need to talk about it in a much more sort of micro-targeted way, because that's really probably the more near-term, more realistic conversation. So what I mean by that is, let's talk about the production process as we know it, which we all know is sort of a whole series of things that happen all the way from the script writing to post-production. And there's 20 different things that happen, right? AI can attack every little piece of that. And it's going to do that in varying degrees at varying degrees of success. And we could have a 10-hour conversation about that. Content localization, though, when you say that, it brings to mind for me that when you talk about a near-term realistic opportunity, dubbing to me represents an opportunity that's like AI, Sora, we don't even know when that's going to be released. That's something that's like OpenAI, I think actually just this morning, OpenAI said, yeah, it's coming out at some point this year. That thing's only been like demonstrated. No one's actually put their hands on it yet, okay? So it's kind of almost like it's a fantastical notion. Now let's talk about what's happening now and real and in the marketplace. Dubbing. There are multiple actual products in the marketplace. I think one's called Paper Cup, one's called Deep Dub. Multiple software active can be used right now that can make dubbing so much easier. Unfortunately, are displacing actual human beings that, let's say you've got, product, video X, movie X that can be dubbed into hundreds of territories, and the human actors that could be translating it into Cantonese, Portuguese, they're no longer needed. Software can do it for instead of those human beings. There's actually something called vubbing that could also do a video version of it, where, instead of just seeing, sound, you could actually transfer the human person's mouth in the video so that it could look like they're saying something as well. All these technologies are happening now. This is in the market. It can happen now and can have a dramatic impact on how this content is monetized. So it's a very, very different example than something like Sora, which at some point it's going to happen. This is now, and it's sort of this very surgical strike in the broader production process.
Thanks for that, Andy. And you kind of hit on what was going to be my next question, which is being realistic about kind of what are the practical applications in the near term and thinking about the adoption landscape. We know that adoption isn't uniform in Hollywood, right? Just because somebody built, the old expression, build a better mousetrap and the customer will beat a path to your door. For you young folks, maybe you never heard the second half of that expression, meaning that if you do it better, if you have a better product, you don't actually have to market it. People will just adopt it. We have now hit a point where we experience what I think was Larry Downs calls Big Bang disruption, which is you have these instances of innovation where better, faster, cheaper, et cetera, but they take over the world instantly. And at the same time, you have plenty of instances where new technology is developed, but it doesn't catch on like wildfire. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. Some are institutional, some are kind of broad economic factors, some are organizational around kind of incentives and what's at stake for the people in the organization and whether or not, from their point of view, it's better, right? It represents a better future for them, right? And so it doesn't always follow this kind of smooth hockey stick curve when we talk about adoption of innovative technology. So again, I'll start with Jeffrey, we can go down, but what do you think kind of practically are some of the things that you think we'll see in the next 2 to 5 years, and or what do you think adoption will look like this time?
Well, think about this. If you would have talked to me 3 years ago, I was talking about metaverse, right? Meta changed its name from Facebook because metaverse was going to be such a big deal. Yeah, the lesson of the story. Anybody remember 3D television, right? Did it take off? No, only with a very niche portion of the consumer base, right? So just like I have 2 daughters, I tell them like watch what people do, not what they say, right? I say the same thing here, right? We want to watch behavior. Right? Watch consumer behavior. Watch if people are using this Apple, Vision Pro, or if they're using these headsets and you're starting to see them like, wow, they're walking down the street using this headsets like we see every day if you go to the airport and just watch people's behavior. They're not reading magazines. They're on their phones looking down at some screen, some article, whatever they're doing, right? Behavior matters. So what I would encourage everybody to do, watch the sales of these products, watch the engagement of these products, watch what consumer behavior is. Are they adapting, right? If I see, this sounds poor, but it sounds like, like I'm making fun, but I'm not. I'm on the board of the company called National Health Foundation, and we do research with the homeless. And let me tell you, most homeless people have a cell phone, right? You don't have anything else, but you have a cell phone. We need these things now. And so that's just a data point. And so at some point, what are we watching entertainment-wise? Now, I went somewhere just for a minute before about content and content that has to deliver all over the world and different types of content. My production partner, Emmeline Rodalis, who could not be here, she's my collaborator, and we're finding that we have opportunities because of AI that we would not have had. Think about if you have a movie and it's a 1910 period piece, which means it's 100 years ago. Those are really expensive to produce. Think about Napoleon and Gladiator and all these types of movies. Remember Braveheart? You only see these, note these big ones because they're very expensive. You got to bring hundreds of people in, thousands of people in for the sets. Remember the movie Glory back in the day, right? Battle scenes. Think about if I'm telling a more niche story that has some diverse elements. Okay, I'm telling one about an African-American pilot in World War I. Well, I'm not going to get the budget for Gladiator. But wow, I can still tell this story by using some artificial intelligence pieces. I can use some of these efficiencies. If I'm a new filmmaker at UCLA or USC or NYU or Chapman or any of these great film schools, guess what? I'm learning this stuff because what am I going to be chasing all my early career is budget. So I'm saying, watch the behavior, watch the uptake. If you notice Apple's iPhone 15, when it came out last year, what were they marketing it as? Oh, bring 5 of them, sync it up, and you can do VR, AR movies, and you can do a real movie with it. Now, we know anybody in the business says, okay, you're not really going to make your movies with it. But guess what? If you're a new influencer on TikTok, you're making your movies with it, and you're going to start using 3 camera setups from Apple. And think about, and just think about the disruption from Kodak, right? Oh, and beyond.
So this is where Daisy, we were talking earlier about the idea that, being able to find some efficiencies will make it easier for some projects to get greenlit. But from the perspective of the investor, one, how did the emergence of some of these innovations impact the approval process or the investment decision? And secondly, given the fact that we're still in the very, very early innings, how do you think about risk in that environment, right? Because presumably somebody's coming to you and telling you, oh, we're going to do Glory, but it's only going to cost us 20 cents on the dollar because we're going to use these innovative whatever, but they're not tested. They haven't been proven. Like, how does that factor in?
Well, I think if we can get AI to a point, to use in a green light model, it could impact the budget. It could impact the decision to go traditional theatrical versus straight to streaming. That is a consideration people have to make today. And they have to make that economic decision. Even if they're going to say, I'm going to do this as a producer for hire and give away my rights in perpetuity, right? Are you going to take that economic benefit now, or are you going to take the risk of a traditional theatrical release with all of the windows collapsing, and you're not sure what the windows that exist today, what they're going to look like tomorrow? I mean, you can model it out. You can also model out performance in international markets. So there are so many potential applications of using it from a financial perspective and to determine as an investor the risk. Because alongside the decision with a theatrical performance, which you can have much more economic benefit as opposed to selling to a streamer with a fixed fee, take your money and run. But a theatrical performance, the other analytics you have to think about is print and ad expense, what we call P&A. There are a lot of analytics that go into that as well. Like, how much are you going to spend in P&A? When are you going to spend it? What markets are you going to spend it in? Because P&A can also break the bank, so to speak, when it comes to the profitability of a film. So we can think about the future use of AI to fine tune and automate and refine these processes as investors, as bankers, and as the producer of their own profitability amongst, everybody in the food chain.
Can I ask a question though, Daisy? What do you think? I listened to what you're saying, and I'm pretending in my mind that I work for OpenAI, and I'm saying to myself, how much should I price the software given how much production costs are? Like, I just wonder, like, I assume I need to undercut how much existing production costs are, but not by that much. Like, so, how do you anticipate the OpenAIs of the world are going to approach pricing?
That's a really good question, because I don't know that, when producers have to think about where they're going to try and create efficiencies, it's going to be in below the line, right? So they'll have to think about for right now, what the immediate applications are, set design, hair and makeup for aging, or, science fiction. What can those tools do versus the human cost of hiring a makeup artist? So I think that depending on the complexity and the size of the budget, the OpenAI or the AI apps, they're going to have to work with content producers to uncover. I don't know that producers will be very open about that. because sometimes they're very protective of their budgets, but there's definitely a cost benefit analysis. Is it less expensive to hire, somebody in wardrobe and makeup to do, to age an actress, have her on set right now, and, whatever, the below the line wages are, versus learning the technology to age someone and spending that energy to train people and the cost of it. But I think, in order to be forward thinking, as I had mentioned earlier, the learning and the training, that's always going to be time and energy spent of what you think it could look like in the future. Because clearly everything, when technology first hits, it's very expensive. As economies of scale grow, the costs go down. Competitive applications can come in, also driving down costs. So there's going to be a higher upfront cost for sure, in my opinion, versus what we have today. But if you want to think of the future, I think you need to learn those skills now.
Can I just add, because this is fascinating. Think about what she just said. She's talking about makeup, hair, all these things. Remember, Hollywood is a unionized environment. So your trade agreements, all of your collective bargaining, everything's done over a period of years, right? And so the industry protects itself. So now we have a makeup filter on TikTok that's as powerful as, the age a person 30 years, and you see TikTok influencers doing it every day, where they'll have a side-by-side of themselves as, here I am as a young girl, here I am as a young woman in college, here I am as a young mother, and here I am as a grandmother, and it does it flawlessly and for free. Folks, we have business models that are colliding, right? So some of these things we're going to see exploration, and others we're going to see other areas. Show that the next slide. I just want to show this one slide. So this is Sora, right? So I think everybody in here should at least know what is OpenAI is attempting to do with Sora. The slide right after it. Think about this slide right here. This is digital art. And the thing about what the conversation we're having, whether it's a video game, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's a movie, a script, it's all an expression of creativity. So we want to protect these things, put walls up to monetize them. So now this is beautiful art that I could print out that I got basically by doing a voice prompt. And I can say I want a basketball player who can dunk. I wrote the prompt out. I'm not going to read it up there, but this is a prompt, and the OpenAI creates the artwork based upon my prompt. Now that said, this has impacts on our business. There's people that make a living around the world in art, right? In music. Can I say, create me a hit song or whatever it is, and can it actually do it? I don't know. Music is very personal, right? But if we have the data, you might be able to do that. This is very personal, but it created it based upon a prompt. So what if I prompted something else? So where I'm going is we're not going to solve it here, but we're definitely going to say, like, these are things to pay attention to. AI is not your bad friend. There are going to be some real powerful elements to it, but there are going to be some challenges, some trademark challenges, some IP challenges, some monetization challenges. But just like Google, it's going to be around.
Okay. With that, I want to open it up to questions from you. I see one here. Hands up high if you have questions. Okay. So start here.
So very interesting. I was listening to a podcast on my way out here, thinking of the topics exactly. It was Adam Grant, who's an organization psychologist at Penn, and will.i.am. And Grant then asks him, he says, well, how do you use AI to be creative? And he's like, oh, I don't think it's creative at all. And they distinguish between being actually creative and regurgitating. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, I think this is certainly interesting, beautiful, but is it actually creative? Or is this sort of the sum of all the knowledge that I've copied? And is it sort of distilled from, I don't know, maybe it's distilled from some Michael Jordan pictures. I don't know, but curious to know your thoughts about that distinction.
Well, I think that definitely creators, they're unsettled, and there have even been articles and lawsuits about the use of AI on existing intellectual property and the infringement of that intellectual property. If you say, create a video or create a song, like, and then fill in the blank, you're training AI based on somebody else's intellectual property. Should they be monetized for that, the original creator? But, you know, if you think about the scope of what AI can grab, you know, out there on the internet, you could grab thousands of different kinds of IP. So, you know, I think that's the struggle for IP owners and content creators. But what's interesting, an interesting aspect is a little bit tangential to your question. And I was speaking with somebody who's at a major label and their perspective on AI. So they still believe in human created music, but they're using AI to find AI generated music that is a replication of their own artists. So they're using AI to detect copyright infringement. So AI can be used as a tool to protect your IP and to monetize your IP. If you use AI to find clips, unauthorized clips of your content, whether it's film, TV, or music, and you use that AI to notify you of copyright infringement. I mean, that was the big issue in 2009, 2008, when I was at Sony about copyright infringement, right? Replications of DVDs, you know, stealing assets. That's really what, and that's what happened with music and Napster. So now we have the technology to identify it and say, you know what, you infringed on my copyright, take it down or pay me.
To answer your question is, I want to add to this because I think it's a really valuable question. If you go through the logical expression in the 2010, 2012 area, we were building big screen televisions, high definition, HDR, 60-inch, 80-inch, and everything was about Blu-ray disc and high definition. And we were, you know, and the consumer was going to pay a lot more to have that beautiful picture in their home. Then we started watching behaviors of 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds, and they're watching Seinfeld or Friends or whatever they're watching, and they're watching on their clunky little, the tiny little iPhone, even before the big one that I use. You guys follow where I'm going? Sometimes people trade down based upon utility, right? They trade down in some cases, or they trade over. And so where I'm getting at is the prompt for this, I added here, the prompt for this artwork, right? Not that I like it or not, right? An expressive oil painting of a basketball player dunking depicted as an explosion of a nebula. And it just created this. And then the second version was created by an upgrade of the tool. Where I'm going is it's not about perfection. It's not about whether it's perfectly creative. It is about if these tools become the norm, they'll be part of our process.
And part of our culture.
Right, and part of our culture. I can't tell you how many times I say Google it now, ridiculous how many times, because Google's just a part of our vernacular. It's a part of what we do, a part of how we research things, right? Even though there's a lot of flaws with Google in some ways that it pulls things up.
Okay, another question was here, right?
Thank you. So I'm in the world of distribution. Sorry, I'm in the world of distribution. So you guys were talking about collapsing windows of distribution. And selfishly, I want to know, where do you guys see in television, in the lens of television more than movies? Where do you see, I wrote it, what windows do you forecast to be the most important in the next 5 years?
Wait, can you ask that question one more time?
Yes. What windows of distribution do you forecast in the television content in the next 5 years to be the biggest revenue drivers?
To be the biggest revenue drivers.
Yes.
Okay. Andy?
I mean, I guess this is a non-AI question,
Yeah.
but I mean, obvious, well, I guess nothing's obvious, but you know, the streaming services are where it's at. It doesn't seem to me that any other window, I mean, I guess I can't see how other windows you could make an argument for any other window. It just seems to me that whether we're talking about the theaters or broadcast television, it's just pretty clear that all the energies right now are streaming, and licensing even to the point where you could even narrow it to not just streaming, but Netflix streaming, because all the other streamers are licensing to Netflix streaming. So I don't know if I could.
I would go further.
Yeah.
I would say that it's going to be about data. You're going to say, look, it's about greed is the wrong word to say, but optimizing monetization, right? So you're going to see the streaming window is a very important window. It's going to stay. However, you're going to see people like trying to keep that theatrical window, right? All the studios are trying to get that window back. That's a very profitable window. Remember, there's a big difference if I'm Disney or Sony or Fox or even Netflix with their movie side of the unit, or Apple's new Napoleon movie. There's a big difference seeing it in theatrical to their artists and the people that are in the creative community. So they're going to want that window, and but it depends on the data. If we can make money on that window, you'll see that window stay and you'll see it expand. If not, you're going to see it collapse like you wouldn't believe, like we did during the pandemic. Those windows, right?
So was your question about film or television content, episodics? Okay. So with television and episodics, I think, what we're starting to see is a trend. Like 5 years ago, a streamer would pick up global rights in perpetuity. Now what we're seeing is maybe 2 streamers. One picks up domestic and another streamer picks up worldwide to share the cost. We could also see the evolution of it's not in perpetuity, or it's a license period of 10 years or shorter, because producers may want to monetize in other non-SVOD platforms, subscription platforms, things that are fast, right? Free ad-supported TV or AVOD, because that could also generate additional revenues from advertising. So I think we're still in the middle of what this transformation is going to look like, but it's starting to look like consumers want to spend less on all of these separate subscription models and going towards a fast model. So that's
ad supported.
Yes. So that's an opportunity for additional revenue.
All right, Nick's got the last question. Rapid fire. We're down to our last minute.
Hi, thanks, Jay. I want to give 3 really quick examples and then ask a question really about the speed of adoption with AI. Example number 1, our company was featured in the Wall Street Journal on Friday because we were the first company to create an AI avatar for a presidential candidate, and we employed a range of technologies behind that. Number 2, last year we created for McGraw-Hill 1,200 videos, equivalent to 56 feature-length movies for a new learning app. We couldn't have done that without a whole range of generative AI engines underneath the hood. Another example, we're piloting the ability to create a higher ed course with questions, course outlines, multimedia content, and so forth for the learner by hitting generate, because we're chaining together multi-step prompts across many different engines to create that. And that's not restricted by unions or other protective classifications, organizations, and so forth that perhaps Hollywood is facing today. So my question is around the speed of adoption. Should we collectively here in this room be thinking that the speed of adoption of AI, given these and many other examples, Sora and so forth, we should be thinking that AI is coming much faster and maybe an exponential rate rather than a linear rate? And should we be resetting to that speed of adoption from the technology that is out there?
Now, you're asking generally across all industries or specifically in entertainment?
Let's start with entertainment, given the forum here. But should we be really thinking about, changing our perspective on the speed of adoption of AI and the impact it could have? Is it an exponential technology or a linear technology?
Okay, so I want to start with Andy again, and quick, because you teased something earlier about how there seem to be 2 camps at South by. So I'm taking it that at least one of those camps thinks that this stuff is happening fast.
Yeah, but I'll say something else that I said before, which is you cannot generalize about AI adoption, even within an industry or across industries. I think different industries and different things within an industry will be impacted at different rates. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but I just can't generalize, sorry.
Yeah, I would say prepare for an acceleration, but we also have to have risk mitigation strategies. We don't want to infringe on copyrights. We don't want to introduce elements, I work in banking, AI generated voice can create problems in banking if you're working with customers. So this kind of technology has to be approached with some thoughtfulness in terms of the risk you're introducing, depending on the industry.
Remember, in American law says that, until, you can prove there was harm, we allow for freedom of expression in our Constitution and in our First Amendment, right? So that, there's a, over protection of freedom of expression. So my expectation is that we're going to be watching heavily where the eyeballs are going, right? Where's the behavior going? Remember, the same thing happened, maybe less on steroids, but Google is probably a good benchmark with, not Google, YouTube, part of Google, but YouTube was a good benchmark where you started seeing people uploading their own videos with their music. And they're not making music, they're putting Michael Jackson on with their video. And then the Michael Jackson estate saying, wait a minute, they're infringing upon, you got my point. That was a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that had to get settled. I expect probably some nasty litigation over a period of time as we, sort this out. But, we're going to go where the behavior goes, right? AI, deep fakes are a real problem. There's going to be some real issues. But we're going to figure that out regulatory wise. Once the behavior becomes, unless we can prove there's harm up front, they're going to allow the behavior to get explored and how we use these tools.
All right. So we have to stop there. We're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Jerry.
So before you leave, a couple of announcements. Our next program is June 6th, and we'll be focusing on residential real estate as well as the economic outlook.
Yep,
the answer to the question about exponential adoption of AI, if you come to that and find I've been replaced by a AI generated bot, it's exponential. And then finally, and once again, we can't do these programs without the support of our sponsors. So I really would like to recognize them once again. And our principal sponsors, RSM and Yamava Resort and Casino at San Manuel. Our platinum sponsors, law firm of Allen Matkins, California Bank and Trust, Cathay Bank, Clark Construction, Leap Development, and University Credit Union. At the gold level, Avenue Insights and Analytics, California Steel Industries, Hub International, PNC Bank, Robert Half and United Airlines. And at the silver level, Bank of California, Chevron, Comerica Wealth Management, Marsh McClellan Agency, Scott Work North America, U.S. Bank Private Wealth Management. At the bronze level, HDR and Shawmut Design and Construction. And at the Bruin level, Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management. Many thanks to our sponsors. Drive safe, and we'll see you in June.